Nothing is true. Nothing is true. Everything is permitted.
Well, actually, you know, you could say you could begin by talking about Native American political theory, which certainly began to have an influence on the more radical colonists. Immediately, they arrived and found out the way Indians lived, and I would say for the entire history of American anarchism, right up to the 1960s and the present, it's been a rediscovery of Native American political theory over and over and over again, which is frequently prompted, like the tribalist movement in the 60s, which was very non-authoritarian and could be called anarchistic. And similarly, right from the start in the 15th and early 16th centuries, colonists immediately discovered that Native Americans had a less oppressive, a more attractive political theory and social existence than they had left behind, especially if they happened to be lower class in Europe. So dropoutism and Indianism were among two of the first important influences on on what later became the American anarchist tradition. So you don't have to start as we did last time. As I said, we started last time with radical Protestantism just for some place to start, but you can always push it farther back again. You know?
Okay. I know we've been treated to less and less of, as someone who was educated in the American school system, basically what you learned about Indians was what you learned in the Western cowboy films. The circle of covered wagons, and but let's not. First of all, there were 1,000 tribes, and they all had a lot of variants.
Absolutely.
And
obviously the eastern tribes were the big influence, and especially the Algonquin Confederacy. And a lot of historians think, I'm no expert, but I've heard it said frequently that the Articles of Confederation, which was the organizing document that came after the Declaration of Independence and was indeed a very radical democratic document, was in large part based on Algonquin political theory.
Well, I'm glad you didn't say the Constitution, because...
No, the Constitution is a Freemasonic plot. We all
we all know that. So we don't want to romanticize
counter-revolution.
The Indians, and from a... I've been reading a little about the Indian colonist wars, and there was enough guilt and horror on both sides to go around.
Sure, but that is...
So if I had to pick, which you don't, I don't think the Indians have given enough credit, but I just don't want them to be overly romanticized.
No, we don't want to go dancing with wolves here, but after all, it is romantic. I mean, the whole idea, there is some, I like to say romanticism might not be truth, but at least it's not banal, boring, stupid simulation. There is a core of something real in romanticism, and that is what we desire. Right? And
we just want the good romanticism.
Yeah, that's right. We want a realistic romanticism, if that's possible. But what drew many white people to drop out and literally become Indians, you know.
Like Morton.
Like Morton was, he didn't actually go that far. There were people who just plain disappeared, like the Roanoke colony, the lost colony. The first permanent established American colony dropped out and became Indians. And they're still living there on the North Carolina border.
I mean, this is... They didn't
so you mean they weren't murdered by Indians? Like
no, exactly. That was the point I was going to make, that in my school book, I remember reading that they were wiped out by naughty Indians. Such was not the case. They left a perfectly clear message carved on a tree, gone to Croatan. It was the message that they had expected to find, that John White expected to find when he got back, but for various reasons they never went and looked for them there until 4 or 5 years later. And by that time, they had gone somewhere else.
So what year was this, and how many people were involved?
Well, they started, and this was like 15, in the 1590s. No, that was Jamestown. That was the first successful one, the one that didn't disappear.
1604?
It was actually in the 1580s and 90s, somewhere around in there.
And how many of them were there? Were they all men?
No, they were not. There was Virginia Dare, you know, the first white person born in America, who was John White's granddaughter. And there were a number of women. I mean, what probably happened is as far as the best guess now, is that there was some trouble with, who was it, Powhatan, I think, one of the big chiefs, and that they went to live with a friendly tribe, the Croatans, and moved south and out away from the trouble that they'd been having with Powhatan. And by the time the Raleigh's people got back to look for them, they were well gone.
And this was a settlement that was sort of was supposed to be a permanent settlement.
Yes, it was supposed to be right. It was supposed to be
an agricultural settlement.
It was
Raising
too
tobacco.
They didn't. It was too small. It was only like 100 or so people, and then when the supplies didn't come the next year, they were in trouble. But clearly, they also wanted to drop out and become Indians, because even when they could have gone back in the early 1600s, they didn't. And we have reports. There are reports of these people, you know, vague reports about
where could one read about that?
Oh, there's a lot of books on the Roanoke. I have one now, I can't remember the author's name. It's just called Roanoke.
Okay.
The story of America's first colony.
Okay.
Is Croatan an offshore island?
Croatan,
Near
yeah. It was another island offshore. It was also the name of a small tribe of Indians. And there's a group now in northern North Carolina who are officially called now the Croatan Indians, and have some of them have the same last names.
So this was
as the Roanoke colonists. So they have the best claim. There are other groups that claim descent too.
So this was a commercial, not a religious-based colony.
Well, that's an interesting question. There are those who would say that that even the Virginia colonies had their religious purpose. There was, perhaps the Church of England, but I mean, certainly the Church of England was very involved in the Virginia colonies. But there's an even more interesting story that Raleigh and John Dee and James Harriet and Walsingham and some of the Hakluyt, the map maker, and a lot of these people who were involved in early colonization were some kind of proto-Freemasons, some kind of Rosicrucian occultist thing going on there, certainly with John Dee.
So is that established in your...
No, that's a theory of mine.
Okay. Well, we got to cover a lot of ground here.
We got to get on with anarchism.
Let's go into New England
all
now.
Right, so
and those were religious. You all remember last week we discussed the Church of England problems
and the radical Protestant sects.
And then they came to New England.
Many of them came to New England. This is something else that gets lost from our history books, which talk about pilgrims and Puritan fathers. They leave out the fact that a lot of these far more radical sects also got shipped over to the New World, or deported, or came on their own.
What was some?
Oh, so I mentioned ranters, diggers, the family of love.
They came here?
Yeah, well, at least they were certainly accused of coming here. The Puritans wrote tracts against them. They said that they had met such people.
Did they identify them by name?
Well, all right, so it's problematical. They called Anne Hutchinson, for example. They said Anne Hutchinson was a member of the family of love, which I don't think was literally true.
So what were her dates?
Oh, you
about
dates.
I mean, was she part of the original Puritan settlement in the 1630s?
Yeah, pretty original. I mean, not the very first, but she was basically what she was. She started out as a Puritan who took the whole thing seriously and got into the inner light experience, and then began to think, bold woman that she was, that she knew better than the ministers. So that she had this mystical experience, and that this gave her the right to preach. And that, in fact, most of the other ministers there did not have the right to preach because they had not gotten in touch with their own inner light. So this is what caused her to be
And was it
tried, condemned. And,
were there women preachers at that time, or
no.
was she breaking ground
She
that way
was
too?
certainly breaking a custom, if not law. She got exiled to Rhode Island, where
Roger Williams.
yeah, Roger Williams had gone the year before.
Been forced there.
Had been forced out the year before. She started her own little colony, which then later finally moved to Pelham Bay. And
In New York,
yeah,
New York City.
right. So where she was unfortunately killed by some Indians who mistook her for the Dutch that they were fighting with, because she was, like all these people, she was very pro-Indian. All of these radicals were pro-Indian. You can always tell, you know, that's the dividing line. You got Cotton Mather and the Puritan Fathers on one hand, who were anti-woman, everything, including especially anti-Indian.
And they saw them as a primeval, sexual, and
the howling wilderness.
The devil.
Yeah, absolutely, the devil and the howling wilderness.
Heathens was the
Right.
favorite term.
So you had the exceptional cases, people like Morton of Marymount and Anne Hutchison, who were pro-Indian, and Anne didn't write anything, as far as I know, after her expulsion from Massachusetts, but according to reports, she had gone, as we would say, to the left, and was now preaching against all government. And
All right.
so, in a sense, I would like to nominate Anne Hutchison as the first American anarchist, but then there were immediately many others who would perhaps come at around the same time and enjoy that title, including a guy named William Harris that I was telling you about, who was an enemy of Roger Williams, who thought that Roger Williams was a right-wing reactionary. I mean, he was so far to the left of Williams. And he definitely talked about no masters, no slaves, no magistracy, which was the 17th century word for government. He came out of a religious thing. The Seekers was the sect that Roger Williams belonged to. But he seems to have taken the whole thing a step further into a political anarchism.
To get
perfectionism, the idea that you could perfect the human being in this lifetime and that paradise would be here and now.
To get back to the Puritans, and who later became the Congregationalists, and who founded Yale and Harvard mostly to make ministers, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Can you consider them, in any sense, witch hunters that some of them started out as ancestors of American liberalism?
Yeah, I mean, the strange thing that happens is that in England, the Puritans are a kind of on the left, if we can use these modern terms, which I'm reluctant to do, but it's the easiest way to talk about it. So the Puritans are on the left. They move to America, suddenly they're the establishment, right? They're in control. So what happens? All the potential reactionary aspects of Protestantism, thereupon emerge immediately.
Calvinism.
I mean, the Pilgrims had like 1 year of communist experience, and they gave it up, after a year, and became, as we...
Who was there? Was there a Yeltsin?
Pardon?
Did they have a Yeltsin?
I don't get that.
I mean, they did the same thing that the Russians are now doing. They privatized everything.
Yes, absolutely.
First
Oh, yes,
privatization.
Yeltsin, right, yeah, I'm sorry, yeah, of course, right. Morton was an interesting figure in this respect. He was Church of England. So when he was in England, you could say he was part of the establishment. But when he came over to the New World, he found these Puritans in control. And he was a man who liked to drink and have a good time, and he got along fine with the Indians. He thought they were much nicer and more interesting people than the Puritans, And so he set up the famous Maypole and
At Marymount.
had the first, as I like to say, interracial be-in in America, and at Marymount, and then was busted by the Pilgrims, by the famous Miles Standish. Came to and actually arrested them in the midst of their revels. So he had been turned by the New World into what? A dissident, someone who we would say was perhaps on the left, was as by comparison with the Puritans and Pilgrims on the right. So the New World had this mirroring effect. It would turn things into their opposites to some extent, and it was a process of, for a lot of people, of becoming wild, of becoming that wild man that was the image in Shakespeare, Caliban, what Rousseau later called the noble savage.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
the unleashing of basic human passions.
unleashing of passions. That's right. The passion as a force for social cohesion.
Yeah, because there were
disorder.
the structures weren't here that existed in Europe.
Yeah. So basically,
institutions.
my feeling is that every early settlement in America was a utopian settlement in some respect. In some cases, as soon as they became established, they would give up those utopian ideals.
Yeah. Well, they came here to establish a kind of much better city on the hill or paradise.
Yes, absolutely. It was all utopian. And as I say, even the Virginia settlements were utopian in some sense. But then, once that planter colonial gentry had established itself, the merchant planter colonial gentry had established itself and given up on those more radical ideas, the groups that came subsequently would be outsiders, would have to remain as unique.
So do you think that was in
this started the whole history of communes and intentional settlements, as opposed to just the general utopian aspect of early American history. Then comes the specific utopias.
Okay, do you think it was partly, or to what extent was it the structure of English capitalism, mercantilism? All of these expeditions had to be financed. People had to pay for them, and the ones who paid took control.
Well,
they came here to ship stuff back. They came
Weber
here to mine the country.
Weber already pointed out the relationship between capitalism and Protestantism. And at one time, capitalism was a radical idea. I mean, this is something that even Marx would agree with. Capitalism at one point was the thin edge of the wedge of the social movement. You had ideological capitalists who were struggling to bring capitalism into being, and these people pretty much generally happened to be sincere Protestants. So, Protestantism and capitalism historically appear together in a sense. So, I mean, you have to, even as anti-capitalists, I think we can realize that at one point, by comparison with feudal remnants and mercantile nastiness of various sorts, ideological capitalism looked good. It looked progressive. It was a reform movement.
So how soon did
modern-day libertarians are still living in that moment of when capitalism was in fact radical.
So when the first Pilgrims landed, say the Pilgrims were they were sort of exceptional, but say when the Puritans came, everyone who's in a new and wild and tough environment, like the first few years of settlement, were often life and death things. But how soon did the kind of class structure, to coin a phrase, reassert itself? Was it right at the beginning?
I would say, of course, it was immediate. That no one got away from class. Certainly not.
Were there indentured servants right at the beginning?
Of course. I mean, basically, the people who got left behind at Roanoke were the underclass, with a few gentry exceptions.
Well, there was a general strike in Jamestown, like very early on. Polish glass cutters.
Absolutely, right. I mean, certainly there was the people who settled Virginia sent over many more indentured types. Indentured servants, and of course they were the people who got into slavery first in a big way too. They were not egalitarian utopianists, don't get me wrong on that point. The Puritans at least had an egalitarian rhetoric to some extent, which made them a little bit more, less class structured. But no, class is something that it's inescapable. The first lower class it happened in Pennsylvania, too. It's a little-known fact that some of the early Quakers, again, this is pre-1700, completely rejected William Penn's authority, did not agree to send, they broke off communication with him, they did not send him taxes or dues or anything, and they ran Pennsylvania for 3 or 4 years just on the basis of the Quaker meeting. It was run by consensus, and if that isn't anarchism, I don't know what is.
Okay,
So in every case, almost every case that you can look at, lower class colonists whose sympathies lay with the Indians, with sailors, with blacks, Then, of course, you began to get the Irish immigrants who were brought over here as slave labor, basically. And all of this kind of what my friend Peter Linebaugh calls the Atlantic working class, you know, which was really a bi-coastal thing. It had to do with England and America.
Yeah.
And all this became the ferment ground that later was the American Revolution.
I was amazed to find that the Bunker Hill incident, the incident that touched off, or one of the incidents that touched off the American Revolution, was really a labor dispute. That it was a rope walk, it was a factory there, and some British soldiers had come up to moonlight. They had wanted to work at the place, and there might have actually been a strike at the time, and they were considered as potential threats to the working people there, and one of them was a black man, and they threw snowballs.
What are they called? Black leg labor.
Oh yeah,
Scab labor.
Yeah, I think there was a labor dispute maybe at the time, and one of them threw a snowball at the at the Brits, and that started the whole thing. And in place of another snowball, they got a rifle bullet.
Very
and a few of them ended up dead.
Maybe we should have a snowball flag.
Well, I think so. Yeah. We've got a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah, we're not even out of the 17th century.
Well, let's jump ahead to the, I guess the utopian, what we call the utopian colonies. A lot of them were.
Can I give you my potted version?
German religious settlements.
What happened was the Constitution came along and put an end. You know, the American Constitution put an end to all of this kind of social experimentation. The Constitution was a counter-revolution, and it took until the 1820s or 30s for the movement to recover. So we can actually make a jump now, a nice jump from the time of the Revolution. And we could talk about anarchistic elements in the American Revolution. They were there.
Would you name some names?
Oh, I think everybody to the left of Sam Adams, you know, most of them are nameless. You know, it's the mob, right? The mob.
Right.
But you had people like, you had a lot of people who immediately after the American Revolution ended up in actions like Shays' Rebellion and the Whiskey Rebellion and the White Indian movement in Vermont and New Hampshire. Was I happen to remember the name of that guy was Barlow, who said that he would destroy all documents and that white people had the same right to freedom as our native brothers. He used rhetoric like this, you know. In the 1790s already, there were plenty of people around who saw the Federalist movement and the Constitution as a counter-revolution.
So there's a huge secret history of America that none of us have been taught.
I mean, it's just endless.
Okay, so let's sort of bring us up at least to, so a lot of the early...
So we could jump to the middle of the 19th century when things got underway again.
The utopian colonies.
Right. Once again, interestingly enough, it was kicked off by religious revivals. Protestant extremism, perfectionism, the whole thing.
Transcendentalism?
Transcendentalism, absolutely. Brook Farm, a key spot. You know, we could talk about all the influences that went into Brook Farm, from the typical American nature mysticism that comes from the Native American side of things, to European philosophy, Oriental philosophy, mysticism of various sorts, extreme Protestant radicalism, you know, sort of post-Unitarian Protestant radicalism, and Charles Fourier, you know, utopian socialism, all of this mixed up together in the mid-19th century to produce the radical reform movement and certain beautiful communal experiences like Brook Farm.
Okay, let's just bring this up.
Are the elements of Brook Farm still in existence where you can visit?
Well, there's a museum.
Yeah, there's one.
But if you want to see the...
No, they...
Oh, yeah, sure.
Well, there's... Interesting,
it's in a Boston suburb.
Yeah, interestingly, they found out that they tore down the last remaining Brook Farm house about 15 years ago.
Really?
Because they didn't realize that that's what it was. It had been moved and used as an almshouse. But to tie this all together, let me ask you one more question. How did this tie into to the Eastern urban working class? I think Fourierism might have been the tie-in.
Absolutely. Etienne Cabet is another name, C-A-B-E-T, another clue for you to follow up I can't go into right now. But There was a French influence. There was German influence through the Bruderhof, Mennonite, Moravian communalism. There were a lot of course, there was always European influence, was always pouring into America, right?
Yeah.
But you don't start to get what we think of as, the Eastern European, Russian, Jewish anarchists. That's all early 20th century. And that's a new element that comes in through those suddenly liberalized immigration laws that we were talking about before.
But wasn't there, was there any movement like in the early American working class?
Oh yeah,
like the Knights of
We're
Labor
leaving out people like Benjamin Tucker, Lysander Spooner, major anarchist thinkers. That Josiah Warren, very important. Usually called the first anarchist in American history. But
were they in eastern cities? Were they in urban or proletarian, working class environments?
Yes.
What about the early labor movement?
They have books in print that you could go to the library and...
Oh yeah, did they tie in with the utopian colonies at all?
Oh, there's such a vast bibliography, I wouldn't know where to start.
All right,
but people can just go to the library.
All right, let's recommend again places where
Okay, St. Mark's Bookstore is a very good place to start. They have an excellent shelf of anarchist books there.
In the balcony.
On the balcony. And then there's the Libertarian Book Club that I told you before, we give our monthly lectures. In fact, we just had Tuli give a lecture.
At 339 Lafayette Street.
339 Lafayette, room 202, zip code 10012. And there are many other anarchist organizations in New York and in the general area. We could try to put people in touch with the type of anarchism that they like. The book club wants to be very general, embracing all types of anarchism, yeah. Just because we're more of an intellectual, discussion outfit than an activist outfit.
There's a New York paper, The Shadow, which can be bought in many...
yes, also Love and Rage. There's a number of publications.
And there are a lot of publications nationwide. There's Fourth Estate out of Detroit.
Fifth Estate is called.
Fifth Estate
from Detroit, and Anarchy from Columbia, Missouri. Those are the two best that I know of.
And there's the IWW Industrial Worker, which if you might find somewhere, which is becoming a lot more anarchist.
There's a good bunch of them at the Living Theater. Good bunch of IWW people.
Okay, so say hi to your neighborhood anarchists.
Well, we hope to see whoever, get in touch with us, come to one of our lectures.
Yeah, and we'll be back here again with Peter Lamborn Wilson. World-class scholar.
I've enjoyed it, and really, two half-hour shows is not enough to...
No, this is going to be continued.
To be continued.
Okay, very good.
Nothing is true. Nothing is true. Everything is permitted.